Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are joining us today. I welcome you to this webinar on Secure Payment Confirmation, or SPC as we refer to it in the shorter form. And of course, I'm also happy to take you through this presentation today. So just before we start, I would also like to introduce you to my colleagues who are joining me here today for this webinar. So I would shortly also do the introduction there. So firstly, to start with Oliver. Oliver is a software engineer who did the implementation for SPC. He is quite passionate about the project, especially since he's been involved with us from the very beginning. He's also part of the payments team and working very closely with me, and of course also supports other teams throughout the product and the project. Then there's Nakio. Nakio is the principal consultant from the incubation and innovations team. I believe most of our customers who are here today, I believe also already know him. But for those of you who doesn't, he works on a broad spectrum of topics across different teams and also supports us on framing and bringing technical architecture on topics together. He was the prime contact for me and Oliver together on this project, the secure payment confirmation topic, and is also supporting us here today during the webinar and the question and answer session. Then there's me. My name is Anjali, and I'm part of the 3D Secure team and work very closely together with Oliver, the engineering team, and other product managers in my team, and topics and work on topics related to our ACS. My prime focus is authentication, and of course today here taking you through secure payment confirmation, which is also a topic that is very dear to me. I hope now with the three of us here today, we can help answer all your questions. So please sit back and enjoy this webinar as we take you through this. Before we start, of course, there are some housekeeping rules that we also need to keep in mind. This webinar is in listen-only mode. You could, of course, also use the chat to ask your questions. We will also try to answer these questions towards the end of this webinar, or of course, just to also let you know, there is a dedicated question and answer session towards the extreme end. And of course, then we would also address these questions with the answers and you being in the listen-only mode. The webinar is, of course, also being recorded, and this will also be available online to you very soon in the next days. Okay, so I believe we are now ready to start. So shortly before we start, just to give you a short overview about the agenda for today. The agenda for today, as you see on the top, I would introduce you into the current landscape and where we stand around with payments and authentications. Then I would dive into the potential of payment authentications when it comes to secure payment confirmation or SPC. Then we will dive into the sneak peek, where I would show you the scenarios when it comes to registration and enrollment and how this would work to really get started with SPC. And then, of course, I would then hand over to my colleague Oliver here today, who would run through the integration components on how this is integrated on our side, and then also run you through the authentication scenarios we have on our end. So also to give you a feeling on how this would completely work. After which he would hand over back to me, and I would speak to you about the benefits we have here, the key takeaways that you would then see that you would get out of this presentation, and then of course the question and answer session afterwards. Okay, so let's start. Before we start, I was really quite interested to see where we stand with biometrics, and I grabbed this really nice image from the web, and you can see that you have the biometric authentications distributed across different regions. And what was really interesting for me to really see was the center part on how this really grows over a period of time. And you could see this really going to 123%. And this really gives us a proof that biometric authentications is really going to be something that would be growing very soon in the next years. So that's really something to keep in mind, to keep with you, and keep this in your mind as we go through the presentation, because you would slowly understand why I'm bringing this slide to you right now. Okay, so around e-commerce, as you can see with the e-commerce business, it's really growing at a very fast pace. It's also creating a lot of opportunities for all of us at low cost for people, of course, around the world. This also means that we need to have easier checkouts. Easier checkouts also requires that there should be convenience, it should be frictionless, it should be simple, it should be straightforward. As card holders, this is the least we would expect. But at the same time, what we expect is these payments need to be secure. There has to be an increased customer trust at the end of the day. There has to be reduced fraud. There's a high transaction security that we would also expect during these transactions. And for this reason, as card holders, we all expect these transactions to be straightforward, but it's secure at the same time. Sometimes we also have doubts. I mean, there's a trust factor, I believe, that now exists, and with fraud rates increasing at such a high rate, this is always something I believe that we keep at the back of our mind. I believe EU regulators and payment professionals are working very closely now to achieve the security levels that are really needed in transactions without unnecessary friction. And I believe you're all aware about SCA, or strong customer authentication, with the provisions that came with PSD2 that help mitigate the secure factor that we have in our mind. But this also does not necessarily mean that things would be very simple for the card holder. I mean, we still have a lot of situations where you would have transactions that would not lead to successful transactions because of different reasons. The details by the card holder was probably not entered right, or you did not receive your passcode or your one-time password from your service provider in time, or the process was too long for you and you had to do multiple clicks. I mean, as card holders, we've all experienced this over a period of time. So I hope we can speak about all these situations, and the next slides that I would be slowly now showing you would be also addressing some of these common challenges that we all face. And of course, the slide that is also now displayed, you can also see on the right how the transactions, online transactions, or e-commerce transactions is really growing over the years in double digits. So this is really, really important that we tackle these problems at the end of the day. Okay. So slowly jumping into my next slide. So around the current landscape, when it comes to payments, I believe this is something we are all quite aware of, maybe a little bit old-fashioned also as compared to the next slides that I would be showing you. We refer to this as the one-time password. So, or the OTP, or one-time passcode. It depends on how we refer to this. And as you see here on the screen on the merchant side, as card holders, once we've made the purchase, we come to this page that is finally taking us to the checkout. So we see the merchant information, we see the amount, we see the date, and we see our Mastercard details, and this one field where we need to enter our password or our passcode. We also have this extra field that we could click on to request a new passcode. And now when I click on this to also give you a small animation, you see this passcode that was now received on the mobile phone, which of course once entered then leads to a successful transaction. But this always might not be the case as seamless as easy as frictionless. Because as a card holder, imagine you're sitting in your office or in your home office or in your bedroom or in your hall or you're somewhere else. You don't necessarily have your mobile phone or the device that you would receive this passcode on. Wherever you're doing this authentication, you still need to look for this device to somehow grab this information to enter it on the final screen to process this transaction. So there's always this dependency on an external device that you always have. The second thing is the dependency on the service provider who's now sending you this passcode. Sometimes this is delayed, sometimes this is not received in time. And then as cardholders, we usually have that feeling to request a new passcode. And this is not always seamless. And I believe this can also lead to abandonments or cardholders being confused on what to do next. So please hold on to that thought, and I would take you to the next slide now that would explain another authentication method that we refer to as out-of-band authentication or OOB. This is a slightly modern authentication as compared to OTP. And as you see the screen on the left, most of the fields before you reach the checkout page more or less look like the same. But here something changed. We do not have that field anymore with the one-time passcode, or we do not have the button here that said you need to request for a new passcode. It's just simple text. And then you see something here that says waiting for app authentication or confirmation. Now, what this usually is because usually this OOB authentication actually means it requires that we as cardholders, if this is an authentication method that we follow, we need to go to the device where this app is downloaded. It's somehow connected to an app that is provided to us by our banking portal or by our bank. And what happens is the cardholder needs to do something on their end to somehow process this request. Now, that was what you saw in the previous slide, was really a mobile phone where you need to click on accept to process this transaction. So that app is usually provided to you by your bank, but as a card holder, you still have this dependency on that device. So you need to look for this device where it is to get it. You need to unlock your phone. After unlocking your phone, you need to accept this request. And after you've accepted this request, then your transaction goes through. So it's not only the dependency on the device there, but you're also dependent on the app, that the app gets the signal that it needs to present you with this authentication. So there's another dependency there that we need to keep in mind, that things might not be so seamless for the cardholder at the end of the day. Okay, then this takes me to my third and the last authentication method. I promise you this is the last one. And this is also something that is also we are aware about. This is mainly FIDO. So FIDO actually stands for Fast Identity Online. It is an alliance, which is an open industry association that develops and promotes authentication standards to help reduce the world's reliance on passwords. They address the lack of interoperability between devices and use authentications and help in reducing the problems that we face with authentications, with remembering passwords, remembering names, remembering passcodes, etc. And what FIDO does, it usually enables authentication, usually with the help of biometrics, as you see here, or it could also be with an external device. This external device could simply be your security key. It could be a USB security token like a YubiKey. It could be smart cards, or it could be simply your watch or even your mobile phone. So this is something that really helps. Of course, the platform authenticators is something that is incorporated, but the external authenticators, which is usually the YubiKey or the phone or the mobile phone, is also something that is definitely external. But you do have the option with the biometrics, like your fingerprint scan, your iris scan, your voice, the face recognition, that is still possible. But FIDO also has some restrictions on its side. So the restriction, one of them mainly being something that we're aware of, is that whatever domain you try to register this product for, this authentication method for online, it needs that you use the same domain also to do the authentication from. So for example, you're purchasing on a certain website, it also requires you that you register this device also on that website. Now imagine if you go to multiple websites, you need to make sure that this device is also connected to the domain of different websites at the same time. The second limitation at the end of the day is you see this window that comes up. This is usually something that is coming up from your browser that is triggered through the FIDO authentication. And this window somehow does not display the information that you see on the background that is there on the merchant side. So the window just says that you need to authenticate yourself, but it does not say what merchant are you trying to authenticate yourself for? What is the amount you're trying to authenticate yourself for? Now imagine us as cardholders, if we are having multiple transactions done at the same time, you would try to connect and understand which authentication are you trying to authenticate. And that is currently also a limitation on the FIDO side. A small technical limitation also to mention here, it requires that this pop-up requires that it's displayed within an iframe. So this is a technical requirement to always keep in mind, and hence this also comes with limitations at the end of the day. Okay, so now after speaking about the current landscape of authentications, moving on to my next slide, I discussed a lot of things in the last slide. So how can we make authentications more simple and straightforward? That's something that always comes to your mind. And what do we expect out of this at the end of the day? What do we want from in the future? We want security, of course, that's the main thing that we need to always keep in mind. But we also want the authentication to be fast. We should not have to be dependent on multiple things at the same time, but we also keep the user experience being important. That is also something we would like to be seamless. So where does this now bring us? This brings us a little bit on the background before we dive into SPC. So what happened in the meanwhile? Three strong bodies, MVCO, FIDO Alliance, and W3C, that's the World Wide Web Consortium, collaborated together to come up now with this standard, which we refer to as a secure payment confirmation. And with this, it's a really good technology that now would help shape the future for web payment security. This comes with the new MVCO 2.3.1 protocol, and this protocol offers solutions that would help ease the problems that we now discuss and somehow leverage the way to provide consistent, low friction, strong authentication flows for online transactions with reduced abandonment rates. This protocol, of course, includes these elements that support secure payment confirmation, and we will see now in the next slides how this works. So what is SPC? So the question that comes to your mind is, how do you define this? It's what do you call it? So it is a web standard, that's what it is, that allows customers to authenticate themselves or cardholders like all of us here today on our bank by just using a simple authenticator, which we call as the platform authenticator. This platform authenticator could be as simple as unlocking the feature on your laptop, like the Touch ID on your Mac device. It could also be the Windows Hello on a Windows device, or it could also be a simple unlock feature on an Android device. And that's it. That's how simple it is. So the question that now comes, how does this work? But it's so simple, but does the working process, is it very complicated? No, it's just 2 steps. It requires you that you register this device. So before you use this device for performing transactions online, it's mandatory that this device is enrolled or registered so that the site understands that you're using this device to authenticate yourself. And what happens is, as you see here in my definition, there's a card holder and there's a relying party, which is usually your bank. And this device needs to be registered with the bank, which is connected to the card that you would be using online to make these transactions. After this process is done, you can proceed with the authentication because the bank now recognizes this device, which is connected to you as a card holder, and you can proceed to the merchant's platform to confirm your transactions and payments. Okay. This now brings me to my next slide to explain to you the first step. So registration, enrollment, they're both synonyms that we would use at the same time. So it usually involves the card holder. So this is the card holder and this is your bank. And now the question is, how does the card holder benefit from this combination of technology? So what does the card holder need to do? So the one way of registering, enrolling your card is with a type of authentication, which is usually through the bank or the issuer, as we refer to this in the payments world. What happens now is, or more precisely, the card holder's bank usually has a portal or an e-banking portal, as we would call this. The user creates an account, or let's say registers an account on this portal by providing a simple gesture on the device that they would like to use for authentication. This could be like the fingerprint I explained to you before, or simple like the Windows hello. What happens next, as you see, is once the user has provided this gesture by registering their device on the portal, a secure credential is created, a secure credential or a secure key, however we want to call this. This is created with the support of something called as the FIDO server on the back end of the bank or the portal. The system then registers this credential, which is now created, and we want to call this as the public key. And this public key or credential, which is registered by the bank through the online portal, then creates something called as the private key on the device of the cardholder. So you also see this with my animation here. This public key is now created. It is stored on the bank's back end. Likewise, that public key has a matching private key that is also created on the device of the cardholder. The secure credential is now stored on the device of this cardholder, which is safe, and it's only known to the device of this cardholder. The creation of this secure credential, in the end, is something to keep in mind, is supported not just by the device, but by the browser and the operating system of the device at the end of the day. What's also important to keep in mind, after we spoke about the creation of the credential also triggers the creation of a profile on the back end, on the bank side, and this is linked to the specific cardholder. So if needed in the future, the cardholder can also register other devices if needed with different operating systems that would also be linked to this profile at the end of the day. So when an authentication will happen, the system would challenge the user's device to say, are you the device that has the private key that we're looking for? This can be done by the cardholder then authenticating themselves with that gesture which I spoke about. And you will see this very shortly in the slides that would be demoed by Oliver. Okay, now we spoke about easy enrollment on the banking portal. There's another way that easy enrollment is also currently in discussions and in progress. And what would happen is, if the cardholder doesn't register their device or doesn't want to register their device on the banking portal, they could also directly do this on the merchant side. The interface would look just the same as you were purchasing something on the merchant side, and the user's registration would also just happen then. But this would happen after you've authenticated yourself for a certain product. Say you're using an existing authentication method. This could be your OTP, or this could be OOP, or anything else. And after that authentication goes through, the merchant's website, together with your bank at the back end is already checking if your device operating system supports SPC. And then if that is already the case, you're presented with a pop-up like you see over here. Would you like to register for SPC in the future? And what happens is when you go to the merchant websites and your device already supports SPC, you could already authenticate yourself with SPC. And that's probably something that would happen in the future and probably an area that would probably be explored. So just to give you a sneak peek on what registration also looks like on our side, took some screenshots that we also have from our system. As you can see here, with just a few clicks, you could register for SPC through a portal, which was also the first enrollment process I spoke to you about. So for registration with SPC, you just need to register your card. So you put in your card details, you're presented with this pop-up now that also shows that your passkey, which is the public key, private key I told you about, it is checking this and creating this to be saved on your device. As soon as you now click on continue, this passkey is now also connecting it to the browser that you are connecting this passkey to. So the browser is now asking, please use your Touch ID or enter a password that would allow you to proceed with this. And as soon as you proceed with that piece of information and you register yourself or your card and your device, the information is saved and the registration is complete. So you see, just with a few clicks, within a few seconds, the registration of your card for SPC is already done. And that's it. You can now proceed to your merchant site and also make the purchase if needed, or the option in the future that would probably also be available is to support enrollment through the merchant site. And I believe that was more or less about registration on how this would happen. I would now hand over to my colleague Oliver, who would now take you through the scenarios we would have for authentication. So I'm going to stop presenting or showing my screen. And now I'm going to make my colleague Oliver also the presenter.
Thank you, Anjali. Hello from my side. Today, I just want to say a few words about the demos that I will show you and the possible scenarios that will be demonstrated. So the first one would be SPC initiated on a merchant shop site. The second one would be SPC initiated by the bank. The third scenario would be fallback to secure credential authentication. And the fourth one would be credentials not found, fallback to another authentication method. But before I jump into the demos, I would like to say a few words about the components overview. As all other transactions are processed with the 3DS, as well, the SPC transaction goes through the 3DS rails. And the main component is the issuer, or the ACS, also known in the 3DS world. So if ACS determines a potential fraudulent transaction, it can ask the merchant to further authenticate the cardholder that's buying something on their site. And this information goes through the DS to the 3DS server back to the merchant, and then the merchant is asking the consumer to authenticate themselves via SPC. And in the left image, you can see the SPC pop-up window that is shown to the consumer. And the result of this authentication again goes from the merchant to the 3DS server and the DS back to the ACS, where the ACS has the final validation, and it can either approve the transaction or ask the cardholder to further challenge the transaction. And that's how SPC works with 2.3.11 protocol. Now, I'll stop the presentation and I will move to our bookstore, our demo shop that I will use today. It's a simple shop where you can buy books. So I'll just add a few books to the shopping cart and I'll proceed to checkout. Now I will enter the necessary payment details like the card number and the validity period and CVC. What's worth mentioning before proceeding with the payment is that this card, I enrolled it for SPC, as Anjali showed you on the previous slide. So it has a credential on this device. Before proceeding with the payment, I like to say a few words about this configuration details, these two checkboxes. We added those in order to simulate different shops and how they behave. So the first checkbox denotes whether the shop supports SPC via 2.3.11 protocol, the latest version. And the second checkbox denotes whether the shop supports payment requests that will come from the bank. So for this first scenario, I would keep both of these checked, since I would like to show you the best case scenario for SPC. Now, once I click the pay button, the ACS determines that I should be further challenged with SPC, and that's where this SPC pop-up window comes. As you can see, here we have some payment details, like the store we are buying, the payment instrument that we're using, the Mastercard number is visible here, and the total amount that we are paying, and we will be verified for it. Now what's left is just to click this verify button, or cancel if I want to cancel the authentication. But since I want to verify my identity, I click on the verify button, and then we are seeing this window. This is the Touch ID feature because I'm on Mac, and it says that now Google Chrome wants to identify myself on this domain. And with just a tap on my finger on the fingerprint reader of my laptop, my authentication is approved and the payment is successful. And that was all for the first scenario. The second scenario that I will show you is what if the shop is not yet supporting SPC on their site. In order to do that, I will use again the same card. I will add the needed information. But now what will change here are the configuration details. So as I told you, I want to simulate a shop that does not support SPC on their site, but still supports SPC payment requests coming from the bank side, from the ACS. Now, what will happen if I proceed with the payment? Instead of seeing what we saw previously, the SPC window, we see an authentication screen here coming from the bank with all of these transaction details. Again, we have the amount, the merchant that we are shopping, the card that we are using, and it says that it wants to authenticate us using secure payment confirmation. Once I click the authenticate button, we'll see the familiar SPC window that we saw previously on the first scenario with the same details. And again, if I click the verify button, I see the pop-up from Chrome that tries to identify myself. And again, I will just tap my finger on the fingerprint reader and the transaction is successful. Now, going to the third scenario. What if the shop does not support SPC on their side, but also does not support payment requests that will come from the bank side? In that scenario, so I will uncheck these two checkboxes. What will happen is actually that I will still be able to use the credentials that I created for SPC and I used for these two scenarios to do a fallback to secure credential authentication. So now if I proceed with the payment, I will see again this authentication screen coming from the bank that it wants to authenticate myself with SPC. But since the merchant does not support payment requests that will come from the browser, I will be identifying myself with the secure credential that I created, but this is not the SPC payment, and this is similar to FIDO as we have currently. So again, with just a tap on the fingerprint sensor, the authentication and the payment is successful. And now for the last scenario, which was what if my device is not registered? How does that look like? I recorded myself on my Windows device. And now you should be able to see the Windows screen. And let me start the video. So again, yeah, here I added a few books to the shopping cart. I proceeded with checkout. I'm using the same card number that I used for these two scenarios, but keep in mind that the credential is not here present because I haven't enrolled this card on this device. The shop supports SPC on their side, but since I don't have credential on this device, we see this nice info message from the SPC window instead of this payment window that we saw. And it says that this shop wants to take additional steps in order to verify our payment because we don't have credential and we cannot use them on this device. Once we click OK, we will see the another authentication method. In my case, this was the OTP because that's how I configured my card. So I received a OTP code on my mobile. I entered the code and I was able to successfully authenticate and do the payment. Now I will share again the presentation. That was all for the live demos. Now what I would like to show you is how does SPC look like on Windows. On the left side, we are seeing the familiar SPC window with the payment details there. And once the cardholder clicks the verify button, instead of seeing what we saw on my site on my macOS, the Touch ID window, here we're seeing the Windows Hello, where again, I could use my fingerprint to identify myself, and the transaction will end successfully. The next slide, this is how SPC looks like on Android device. On the left image, we are seeing the SPC window. Again, we have the same transaction details as we saw on the browser channels on the Mac and Windows. And once I click the continue button, I used my fingerprint and the unlock feature on the Android device to identify myself. And now that was all for the demo. I will hand over back to Anjali to say a few words about the benefits of using SPC.
Many thanks, Oliver.
Yes, now you should be a presenter, Anjali.
Perfect. Thanks, Oliver. I believe now everyone should be able to see my screen. Probably takes a second. Oliver, are you? Perfect.
We are seeing the screen, yes.
Thanks. Perfect. Thanks, Oliver. So I think we all saw a really nice process, and also how authentication really works now for SPC at the end. And I believe this gives us an overview and also the confidence on how simple this could be at the end of the day. So this brings me now to my next slide. There was a question I asked us all in the beginning: how do we think, or how confident we are about the future, and what is it we want in the future when it comes to authentication? Security, authentication, and better user experience. I believe we were able to demo the 3 points to you at the end of the day, where SPC uses the modern technologies is completely supported in the background by MVCO 3DS 2.3.1 standards. So I think this adds the secure feature, and also, as you saw on Oliver's slide, the components that really are used in the 3DS Rails to really support this through and throughout. So there is a high level of security, I believe, that already exists here. Fast authentication, I believe we also saw that at the end. The checkout was really quite quick. There were no redirects. It was really quite secure. And for me, this was a really good experience. And when it came to the user experience also, I think you also saw this at the end. And I think it definitely puts the cardholder in a comfortable position at the end of the day. With just a few clicks, you're able to reach the final page where you try to make your purchase. So for the cardholders, I believe we did see a lot of benefits, but for the issuers also, if somehow we could adapt the shopping on the merchant side, then no adaptations are also needed on the issuer portal. There are costs saved, time saved, and also for cardholders not having to go to the banking portal to register themselves. Everything could be done directly on the merchant side, which also leads for fast and higher checkouts, but also the abandonment needs are then also reduced quite a bit, and the transactions are much more frictionless and more seamless at the end of the day. I believe this would help rise the stakes a lot, help to reduce fraud attempts, deliver fast and smoother transactions at the end of the day, and also provide a very good experience for the end user at the end of the authentication. And I believe there was a note that I also wanted to add. There was some experiments that were also conducted worldwide that even showed that SPC can substantially reduce the authentication duration and bring convenience to us as cardholders, plus providing security at the highest level. So now I believe with all the scenarios now presented to you with the description, etc., we were able to build this confidence at the end. And what I would like to do now is to have a little bit of interaction in this session. So this brings me now also to my next slide, where we have now prepared a very small poll that I would like our audience here to interact with and to also provide some feedback. You should be able to see a pop-up now that comes up on your screen. And of course, the question, as you see now, is how confident are you now that secure payment confirmation can help in simplifying the authentication process for your end users? There are five options there. Radio buttons, you need to choose one of them. So do you feel not confident at all? Do you feel slightly confident? Do you feel in between somehow, somewhat confident? Do you feel fairly confident? Or do you feel completely confident? And I think it would be nice to have one or two options, one option from each one of you to really see how you feel at the end of the day. And also if this session was beneficial for you in understanding how this authentication really works. Let's give it a minute. I see the results popping in. Give it a few seconds more. I see 75% have been voted. I see the results also growing. Okay. Thanks. So the poll is now closed. I believe we had a very good percentage of participants who now voted. And to shortly also share the results with you, I see a really, really high percentage on fairly confident. So that's about 48 to 49%, which is really, really very good. So for me and Oliver, these are nice takeaways today that we were fairly able to convince you that you feel very good about this. We also see a 24% on completely confident, which is also really, really good. There was a small percentage on not confident, slightly confident, and also a really nice percentage value on 23% saying somewhat confident. So I believe with this session today, we were really able to convince our participants here, and we hope this authentication process really kicks off with real good benefits for the future. Okay, so now this brings me also to my next slide. So after our poll, the takeaways is something that you would also keep in mind. What are the takeaways for you from this webinar or secure payment confirmation? In the end, it means one credential per card per device that works for all merchants. It's really that simple. The second one is no requirement for an external device, absolutely, or a mobile device. The privacy completely lies on the user's device. So that's only known by the owner of the device. So there's a privacy setup over there. And the merchant can completely initiate the authentication on their side on behalf of the bank. And these were really the takeaways that I also want to bring back to you, so you also feel confident at the process. And I hope I was able to also convince the other participants who did not feel very confident about this some minutes back. Okay, so then moving on to our next slide. There are some points that we need to consider and also keep in mind with secure payment confirmation or SPC. As SPC is currently in development, the support for this standard is currently on Chrome and Edge. This is also supported on the following operating systems. That's Mac OS, Windows, and Android. This is also currently based on browser-supported channels. And as mentioned, it's always nice to have a fallback method in place. This is always recommended. And these are things that we need to keep in mind. And then this brings me to something that I would also like to share with you. Netcetra was also involved in a very nice pilot on SPC together with Visa to test the first SPC pilot with the 2.3.1.1 protocol. So Netcetera provided the complete technical infrastructure when it came to the 3DS server, the directory server, and the ACS. You can see the whole technical infrastructure was provided and supported by us. And the goal for both Netcetera and Visa in the end was to understand the situation and, of course, then share feedback that would further enable SPC to be kicked off globally from a payment industry perspective. So I believe this was a really nice setup, a really nice project, and I hope we could all share this together with Visa with you in the near future. Great. And that, I believe, brings me to my last slide. I believe I would now open the session to question and answers. We already see some questions coming up, and I would also now shortly also try to read the questions coming in so we could answer. So I have my colleagues here who would also support me. So the first question that came up is, so does this mean that there is no more strong customer authentication needed after approving the payment by Touch ID? Nakio, do you want to take that up?
Yes, hi everybody. It's not that you cannot answer the question, but as I'm also in the list that you've mentioned on the beginning of the presentation, let me say a few words. So SPC is strong customer authentication. So thanks, Michael Miller, for asking this question. The question is, does it mean that there is no more SCA needed after the payment is approved by Touch ID? The payment is not approved by Touch ID, but the payment is secure payment confirmation. Touch ID is just the means how you unlocked the passkey. And as this is a strong customer authentication, then there is no need for additional challenge. Although from a protocol perspective in the 3DS, there is still a room for the ACS to ask for additional challenge. But as this is two-factor authentication, there is no need for this. I hope this answers your question. If you have a follow-ups, please use the tool additionally. Thanks.
Thanks, Nakio. And then this brings me also to my next question. What is the main advantage of SPC compared to OB, of a separate authentication app of an issuer?
I believe the advantage is obvious, as we saw that for the OOB, we need to have our phone. I mean, from a user perspective, definitely, we need to have our phone next to us and make sure or hope that the network is right and we are connected and we authenticate on the phone. While on the SPC, we only need one device, and that's usually the device where we initiate shopping. So if I initiate shopping on my laptop and my laptop is registered for SPC, it has the credential, then I don't need the phone. I still have the same amount of security, but I don't need the phone as additional authentication means. So that's the benefit that I feel comfortable with. That's a benefit for me.
Many thanks, Nakio. Okay. I had another question that said, will you send us the presentation? Yes, you would receive the slides at the end. So for sure, definitely. I had another question which I would like to bring up is also, how is SPC different than delegated authentication? I think that's a very good question. I would like to bring this up because we also had this in the past. So Nakio, please.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. So for those that are into the topic, delegated authentication is a program, and this program is carried by the schemes where they do the authentication, or an entity that is part of this program and approved by the schemes does the authentication, while the issuer or the bank simply accepts the authentication result. That's why it's called delegated, and it usually is combined with FIDO or SPC. So when we speak about SPC and delegated authentication, SPC is the authentication method that is used, while the delegated authentication is the program, and SPC can be used as part of the delegated authentication if the relying party is the merchant, or the merchant is the one that registers the credential on the device. But when it is used in the combination that we showed previously, where the credential is registered by the bank, then we have 3DS authentication where the issuer is fully liable. It's not a delegated authentication. So SPC can be used in the both contexts, but the difference here with the delegated authentication is, as the issuer is the one that registered the credential and that verified the transaction, the liability shift is towards the issuer. Hope this answered the question, Anjali.
Great. No, it was really well answered. Thank you, Nakio. I believe this then took in the second question, is there liability shift when SPC is used? I believe that was also now answered. Is SPC supported on native mobile devices? Oliver, do you want to take this up?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is not. SPC works only on browsers currently. So the answer is simple no, not yet.
Great. Maybe in the near future, but that's currently the answer. Perfect. Okay. Then I had another question. Hi, thank you for the presentation. One question, in case the enrollment happens from the merchant side, will SPC be available to authenticate on the same device for another merchant? The answer is yes. Yes. Provided that the merchant supporting this. Nakio, go ahead.
Yeah, a small clarification from my side. So when we said the enrollment can happen on the merchant side, it's still happening on the issuer side, but is in the context of the merchant. As you could see later when we share the presentation, the one option of enrollment is if you have a strong customer authentication on the merchant side, but through the 3DS, so that's an iframe coming from the issuer or a challenge page coming from the issuer where you actually do strong customer authentication. And after a successful authentication, the issuer is the one that can enroll the credential. So it's in the context of the merchant, of the website. You don't need to go to a specific link on the issuer to register, but as part of a transaction, as part of the 3DS transaction where actually the authentication is carried by the issuer. And still in this case, the credential is created by the issuer. So in technical terms, the issuer is the relying party, but the card holder or the customer sees this in the context of the merchant. So the merchant is not registering the card holder, rather the merchant shows the challenge screen where the issuer is registering the card holder. Hope I did not involve more confusion into this.
Thanks, Nakio. Then I would read out the next question. If SPC is used on the merchant side, is the transaction acting as merchant authenticated cardholder, and the issuer don't need to authenticate, but technically issuer can request strong customer authentication as well? So just so I understood this, and I would frame this what I understood in the end. So the question more or less, like if this authentication is triggered on the merchant side, is this considered as strong customer authentication already by the issuer? I would say yes, definitely. Okay. Then the next question is, if the card holder does not register on the merchant side, what information regarding registration does the issuer receive at the end of the day? Nakia, do you want to take this up?
I mean, it's related with the previous one. So the registration always happens on the issuer side. So it's always the issuer one that holds the public key that is associated with the card number. We just have two options that we can allow to the card holder. The one is that they directly access the website of the issuer or the portal where this credential is created, or the second one is that they do this registration while shopping, while they already interact with the bank or with the issuer through the 3DS challenge screen. Those are the two options. So in both cases, the issuer or the bank is the one that is triggering the registration, because ultimately we want the issuer and the bank to be liable for the transaction when it happens later. But the context here is different from a cardholder perspective. Whether I go to my e-banking website and then I explicitly click and then I do the registration, or this happens during a purchase where a strong customer authentication is performed by the bank. one option, or this is the option, where the bank, after the strong customer authentication, can additionally prompt the cardholder for enrollment for SPC.
Many thanks, Nakio. Okay. I had this question that came up, and I think I can address this. How would the unhappy path where SPC fails work with the fallback solution? So I believe you saw this now with Oliver's demo. It's always recommended to have a fallback mechanism or a fallback authentication in place. But we are hoping now with the 2.3.1 protocol, when merchants start adapting these elements also on their side, this is not needed. But hopefully this would also improve then in the future. But for now, the unhappy part or the not so nice part is always to have a fallback mechanism in place to take care of this if the SPC is not supported. I hope this now answers the question. There was another question is, do we need integration? So by we, I'm understanding issuers. Probably this person is an issuer. In the end, I would say as long as your ACS is supporting this, then this should probably be something that would work out of the box for you. And it would probably be an integration that would be done from the ACS side. So it would come regardless on your end. If this is from a merchant perspective, maybe Nakio, you could take up that question and answer that.
Yeah, if it's a merchant, then there is some work that the merchants need to do to support this. As you saw with SPC, we removed the need of having a challenge page coming from the issuer, while the challenge is displayed by the merchant through the SPC feature of the browser. So here, the merchant needs to integrate the SPC API and correctly pass the credentials that they received from the 3DS process in order to trigger the SPC window, which is some sort of a challenge, and then to get the results from SPC and pass them back through the 3DS rail so that the issuer can verify if they are correct or not. So here the merchants need a small, let's say, intervention on the front end to handle this scenario. There are SDKs that are already available for this. They just need to adapt the handling of SPC. It's not something that can come out of the box. They need to figure out how they want to support this process.
Many thanks, Nakio. I believe we have 1 minute more, so maybe we take one more question. What measures that are there in front to overcome from attackers? I think that's a question that came up. So what are the measures that are considered here if we want to protect this from attackers?
I could quickly say that SPC is based on FIDO. The passkey is created, or it's based on a public key infrastructure. That means that the passkey is created on the user device, the private part, and is not shared with the ACS or with the bank. And for verification of the transaction, there is a cryptography involved. So the security of the passkey depends on the security of the device of the card holder. So if I create the passkey on my laptop, and my laptop uses a secure enclave, special hardware section that stores this private key, then I'm pretty sure that whenever I use this passkey, I use biometrics to unlock the passkey, then this passkey is pretty safe because it's used only on my device to sign something that is verified on the server side. So if there is a man-in-the-middle attack and somebody tries to modify whatever on this payload, then the server will fail the verification because the signatures won't match. If we speak about sophisticated attacks where someone could extract the passkey from my device, then this would be a completely another level of attack.
Great. Very well answered, Nakio. Thank you. I believe we've now come to the end of our webinar, and I would like to thank everyone, all our participants here today, and for the very, very nice questions that were also brought up. Thank you all for joining us today. I wish you all a very nice day and a great week ahead. Thank you, Nakio, and thank you, Oliver, again for supporting me during this presentation.
Thanks for
Bye.
inviting. Bye-bye.
Bye.